everybody. Today I'm going to be wrapping up what I read for Nonfiction November, mostly nonfiction books with a couple of other books sprinkled in along the way. So hi, my name is Talia. I love books, I love bandanas, and I am so happy that you are at my channel today. First, can I just say, we have been so sick in this house the past couple of weeks, and it seems like it's going around like the Pacific Northwest in general. I was talking to some other moms at preschool drop-up yesterday, and they said that the elementary school has had like 30% of the kids missing for like a few weeks. It's just been brutal around here. So is that happening where you are too? Hands up emoji in the comments if your area or you are struggling with staying healthy this season, because around here it is tough. But I have a little bit of life in me today. I'm still a little bit under the weather, but I promise to edit out any hacking or gagging that may happen during this video, so you won't even be able to tell. Okay? So let's get on with it. I'm going to be talking about books I read for Nonfiction November today, and then other books that happen to come along for the journey as well. So let's start with the Red Bandana, because this was overwhelmingly the book that received the most votes when I asked you guys to help me pick my Nonfiction November reads. So it's interesting because when Nonfiction November was starting, I clearly remember Tara from Tara Talks Books saying, "I don't rate nonfiction books." And I was like, I wonder why. Like, why would you exclude a category of books from being rated? And then I read this book and I understand why. So, the Red Bandana, written by Tom Rinaldi, follows the story of Wells Crowther and his basically last moments in 9/11 in the South Tower. And he was a kid who grew up. He was always wearing a red bandana, this bandana that his dad gave him when he was little. This kind of follows the story of his life, and he went missing after 9/11, never was found, and then after a few months, a couple of stories came out in a news article about how these women were saved by a man wearing a red bandana. So they then pieced it together and found out that Wells Crowther was the one who saved these women, and he was actually, when everyone was going down the ladders, the stairs, he was going like back up and trying to get more people out and like helping the fire department on 9/11. So Wells Crowther is obviously a hero. Like, he probably could have made it out of the building alive, like could have chosen to save himself, and yet was trying to save as many people as he could in this terrible tragedy. So this book was super impactful. I will say this is where the rating comes in, as I didn't feel like it was like a 5-star read. 5-star story for sure. Like, everyone should know this story. I felt like the book kind of just focused a lot on different characters that didn't like really have an impact on the story. Like, it would be like, oh, and here's Wells' uncle, and he did this and this, and we talked about him for a couple pages, but it didn't like really tie into the story. So for that, like, rating as a book, I gave it a 3 stars, but like, this is a story you should know, and definitely would recommend reading it anyways, or at the very least going and YouTubing Wells Crowther or the man in the red bandana, because his story has had an impact for many years. And there's like in the college that he went to, they have like a red bandana run every year, like in his memory, and just a really neat story of growing up, just a really genuine human being. And yeah, it's interesting because 9/11 happened. It was the beginning of my senior year in high school, and I'm on the West Coast, never been to New York, honestly did not even know what the Twin Towers were prior to 9/11, because I don't know, I'm just in the West Coast. That's not something we like studied. Like, I had no idea. But I remember waking up that morning to it on all the news stations. I remember watching the towers fall. I remember driving to school and knowing like that this was a big deal. Like, this was terrible tragedy that thousands of people are dying right now. And then I remember we watched it at school in the first period, like the first period class, we watched it. And then we literally never talked about it again. And it's really interesting because like I was busy. I had, you know, school and sports and like church activities, and I was just busy. I like sitting and watching the news wasn't something I did, so I just never, it's like I knew it happened. And like growing up, you heard stories about like, oh, this person was in 9/11 and this like I knew it happened, but I never really studied like what it was like. I never had read like survivor encounters. I had never, I just had never really stopped to think about it, which is terrible and shame on me. And also I think that this is a failure of the public school system too, because I took US history my senior year of high school and we never talked about 9/11 one time. Like we never talked about it. Like, so I feel like this is part of the reason, like there's lots of reasons I'm homeschooling my kids, but part of the reason is I think that public schools just have their curriculum they stick to, and they like have all these boxes they have to check off to get the kids through, and they miss the big parts of life sometime. And I really feel like 9/11 over here on the West Coast, at least in my school, was something that like we should have been talking about more, you know? And I don't know if it was just because it was so raw, like that teachers didn't know how to talk about it, or I feel like they probably just were sticking to their curriculum. But anyways, so it was really emotional for me reading this, and then watching videos, and I kind of went down like this long rabbit hole of watching footage, because there's so many videos people got of 9/11, like just people from their apartments that are now available on YouTube that you can just watch them and their reactions and like this tragedy unfolding. And like it kind of was just a crazy couple days for me, because I feel like I really processed, I just processed this tragedy. Like, I don't know, it was odd, it was tough, it was impactful. So yes, one of the it wasn't in this book, I think one of the newscasters said when this was all going down, they're like, this is just like the worst of humanity. And it truly is. To murder like thousands of just innocent people is truly evil. And we could have a big theological discussion right now about it, but we won't. But let's stop with the tangent, and before I get emotional. And Wells Crowther, the Red Bandana, YouTube it. I'll put a link below to one of the videos about him, and you can watch that. Definitely a story you should know. Okay, let's move on. So we moved from 9/11 to Into Thin Air. I loved most of my nonfiction reads. They weren't really happy stories though. So I moved from the Red Bandana to Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. This was an amazing story. This was, Madeline, I told you could be in here if you stayed by the window and didn't bug me. You want to go out? Hang on, I gotta deal with the cat. So Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. This is a story of the 1996 disaster on Mount Everest. And this was such a, I don't know how to describe it. Like the whole time reading this book, I was just like, why are you guys doing this? Like, I hate the cold, I hate the winter. The thought of like going and climbing a mountain in the freezing cold where you may or may not die is just like the last thing I would do. And I know there's lots of people who do this and want to do it. It was interesting because I didn't know like the whole process it took to climb Everest. Like you have to hike like a big hike just to get to base camp, which is like base camp is like higher than all the mountains around my area. And then you have to be there for like 6 weeks and go up and down and up and down and try to acclimate. Like this is a process to climb Everest. So the whole time reading this book, like leading up to the tragedy, I was just kind of like, you guys are crazy. Like this is not something I want to do. And like they're literally at risk all the time from like brain bleeds from the altitude that you can't even control. It could just like happen at any time. And like just you could freeze to death anywhere. And that like when you're climbing Everest, there's like a body there, a body there. I'm like, people who climb Everest, you're crazy. Like, there's a special type of crazy. Amazing. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I applaud you. Like, this is incredible that you can push your body this hard and be this brave to, like, know you might just slip through a little crevice, like huge crevices that you could just like gone. Like, you're amazing, but also you are crazy. So anyways, this follows Jon Krakauer going up to Everest, and this crazy storm that hits in May of 1996, and 8 people end up dying in one night. So this terrible tragedy, he kind of talks about what led up to it, what went wrong, and it's just really sad because you follow all these characters, he introduces them all, and then like there were so many characters that by the end I couldn't remember like which ones had survived and which ones hadn't survived. So then I would just be like, oh man, they didn't make it. Like, it was depressing, but it was really good adventure story. Really good, just teaching me what it takes to climb Everest and how there are people who have characteristics that I will never have. So definitely recommend this. I will say I think I liked Into the Wild more because I read Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer earlier in the year, and I would think for me I liked that book more, but this was very good too. So yes, recommend. Good. Okay, 2 audiobooks I listened to for nonfiction November. I listened to first American Predator, and this was written by Maureen Callahan. So American Predator follows a meticulous serial killer named Israel Keyes. And I had never heard of Israel Keyes prior to reading this book, but let me tell you, if you like serial killer books at all, you need to read this. It is so good. Obviously a little bit of content warning because he's a serial killer and he does terrible things. But man, it kind of follows like his story of his capture and then his interrogation and him like giving bits of pieces of his travels and murders, and like just super interesting to see into the mind of this serial killer. So he lived like in Alaska. He was, I think, a contractor just living a normal life, and he would randomly just like book a plane ticket to somewhere in the United States, and then he would like drive thousands of miles and had like these kill kits set up in different states that were like buried underground, and then he'd like unbury them and kill someone and like drive 1,000 more miles and then like fly home to his daughter and just live like nothing ever happened. Super crazy. But super good. I think all of us has that like little bit inside of us that is like, whoa, serial killers are crazy. And we want to get into their minds a little bit. So that is definitely a book that I recommend for sure. So after we went through 9/11 grieving and then into thin air disaster tragedy, and then I read about the serial killer for a while, I was like, I need something more uplifting, and I had We Were Dreamers by Simu on my library holds. It became available, and I was like, great, this will be a positive, uplifting story that I will really enjoy. Oh man, and then Simu talks for like 7 chapters about like how hard it was for his parents growing up in China and like just the struggles they had at the hands of the government there. And then he talks for a long time about how his relationship with his parents and how it was like terrible and abusive. And I was just like, oh man, I can't get a break with these nonfiction books. But that did turn around in a very positive way. And I was glad he talked about like his parents' earlier history and then their relationship growing up, because he really turns it in a positive way, and you kind of see like where his parents were coming from, because Simu, like his parents were pushing him to be like something big, like because they came from China to Canada and made something of themselves, and they were like giving everything to their son and providing for him, and they wanted him to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like amazing, and Simu didn't want to do it, you know, he like wanted to be an actor. So it's a story of him like pursuing his dreams, going against his parents' will, but also in the end like maintaining a relationship with them, and having great success. Obviously, with Kim's Convenience, and now he's a Marvel character. I don't traditionally love like the Hollywood, like, oh, I was very sad and now I worked really hard and now I'm an actor. I think like most celebrities, a lot of celebrities have written stories like that. But I really did enjoy this one. I thought it was a really great story. 4 stars only because of language. Like, there was kind of an overuse of the F word, which like doesn't like personally bother me. Like, I understand that that word is used. I just think like in books it should be used in like extreme circumstances, like when something really bad happens or when like it's like a moment of passion. I don't love when people just use it as like part of everyday language. You know what I mean? It just kind of turns me off. And like, you can't think of a better word to use. Like, you can't articulate your feelings more than the F word. So for that, I was kind of like, come on. But I still recommend the book. I think it's a great story. It made me laugh, definitely made me cry. Listen to the audiobook because he reads it himself, and he like a couple times when he's like talking about his grandparents, especially at the end when he's reading like his thanks to everyone, like he is choked up and I have like tears streaming down my face. Like, he does a very good job reading it and telling his story. It just makes you feel like he's not reading a book, like he's just chatting with you. So definitely recommend the audiobook for that one. The last nonfiction book I had for November was Our Story by Rao Pingru. And I did not end up really reading this one. I got this far. It just didn't draw me in. So this is a man who in his 80s decided to write/draw the story of him and his bride and their lives growing up in China. And I did not like it. It was fine. It just didn't suck me in right away. It was kind of just like a meandering story. I was liking looking at the pictures. So he drew all of these pictures. So I did flip through and like looked at a bunch of these and read like the descriptions underneath. But I just decided this was not a story I wanted to read at this time. So it's a DNF for now. I think I would definitely will pick it up at some time in the future. I was just short on time this month and was just enjoying the pictures more than reading the story. So still going back on my shelf as a DNF for now, but not one that I'm like, it's not gonna be unhauled anytime soon. Okay, next I read I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. This was part of the Fear of Missing Out book club, the first book we read for that book club, and I'll put links to the announcement videos for that book club below. I found out about it through Jack from Spread Book Joy, and we are reading one book every 2 months, and they are books that are popular that you possibly may have missed out on. So I had not heard of I Capture the Castle prior to reading it. Dodie Smith is actually the author of 101 Dalmatians, which is interesting. So I had no idea really what to expect going into this book. It was written in the 1940s, so I was a little intimidated because that time period is kind of challenging for me sometimes, but I loved this book. We follow Cassandra, who is living with her father, stepmother, and siblings in this like totally like dilapidated castle. Like, they're very poor, they're in a castle, but it's like falling apart. They barely have enough to eat. And it's all told in her journal entries. And she is 17, I believe. And I just feel like this book just did such a great job putting you in the head of a 17-year-old girl who is in the 40s and living in a crumbling castle. Like, you just felt like you were there. And it's really funny, and the story was just told very well. I don't want to tell too much about it because spoilers, but yeah, I recommend it. I really liked it. It did have a little bit of like the trope of I fell in love in a day, which I don't love, but I understand in that time and living in a dilapidated castle, if you had the opportunity, you'd try real hard to fall in love in one day to get yourself out of that situation. So yeah, I liked it. There is going to be a live discussion on this book, I think at the end of December, so you still have time if you want to read this and catch up and participate. It's a November-December read, so you have time if you want to participate in this with us. Okay, this book was nowhere on my TBR at all for November, but I was at Goodwill one day and they had a bunch of different book of the month copy books in pretty decent condition. So I picked them up. I was so excited. And then the day after, I kid you not, I was on Discord and I noticed that Book Blather, Dave and Olive, were having a group read in the month of November for this book. And I was like, I commented and I was like, oh my gosh, I just found this book yesterday. I wish I had time to participate this month, but I don't because I'm full of other things. And Dave and Olive, I'm pretty sure this was Olive inspired, was like, Talia, basically you need to suck it up. It's the holidays. You got time to read it. Come on, read it with us. So I was like, okay, twist my arm. And I did. And I'm so glad I did. So it ended up being Dave and Olive and then Kelli over at Kelli Reads All Day. I read this book together. So this book follows our main character. Her name is Darby. She is stuck at a rest stop in the mountains in a snowstorm. And she's like on her way home for the holidays. So she's stuck at this rest stop. There's a couple of other people there. And when she goes out to her car, I can't remember, to get something for some reason, she sees a small child in this van that's parked next to her car. So she is like, oh my gosh, why is this child here? And this child is locked in this cage. So then she knows that one of the people that's in this rest stop with her is a kidnapper. So it goes from there. She's trying to figure out who's the kidnapper. How can I approach this and save this child without having serious harm come to me? And it was nonstop action. It was really good. It kept you like, I just flew through it. It was like page after page, like just, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen next? And there was twists and turns and like, what? It was really good. I really liked it. Content warning for sure, language and like some just like yuck scenes pertaining to child and woman kidnapping. But overall really good. Definitely recommend. I want to see what else Taylor Adams has written. Because I think I would like to check out another book by him. Oh, and I found out that he is from the Pacific Northwest, so always got to support your Pacific Northwest authors. I also liked how he kind of tied in, like, Darcy had a strained relationship with her mother, so it kind of tied in, like, lessons pertaining to that and mistakes she'd made and, like, how she wanted to save this girl, just kind of to make up for mistakes she'd made in her past. So I kind of like how it tied in those themes as well. I thought this was really well done. Definitely recommend. If you need like a quick read, like if you're like, hey, haven't made my goal yet for the year, I need some quick reads, this will totally, like, you'll finish it in a day. Like, I read it so fast. And I was so glad I was reading with Dave and Kelli too, because it was kind of like, it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. And it was like nice to have people in the moment that you could message about what was going on. So I really had fun with this one. This was a good time. Thank you, Goodwill, and thank you, Peer Pressure, for getting me to read that this November. Okay, last I read for my book club Horse by Geraldine Brooks. I listened to this on audiobook. Man, I don't have a lot to say about it because I don't remember a lot of it. I didn't love it. I read it like the very beginning of November. I didn't love it. It's about a horse. I don't really like horse books, but book club made me read it. So it's 3 different timelines. We have this horse and this young slave who is in charge of like taking care of this horse, and the horse becomes a very good like racehorse. And this is a true story. It's historical fiction. So this was a real horse. So it kind of follows like that timeline of this slave helping this horse. And then there's another timeline later where they are finding like paintings of this horse, because there was an artist who did a lot of paintings of this horse in the past, and then these paintings are famous and worth a lot of money. And then there's these people that are then find the skeleton of the horse, and they are like examining the skeleton of this horse. And it's kind of like it was like a book about racial equality, and also a book about horses, and also a book about art. So 3 topics that like I just feel like didn't tie super well together. It was kind of hard for me to follow, and like the racial stuff in the earlier portions of the book, like I feel like was handled really well, and like made you feel for these slaves that were like doing all the work and getting none of the credit for the work they were doing. I feel like the racial part of the later years was I don't know, some of the dialogue just felt kind of cheesy to me. Like it didn't make me feel like, I don't know, I just feel like it was a miss. Like it didn't make me feel really empathy. It just kind of made me feel like, oh, these people are like kind of both jerks. And I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm just kind of rambling. But then in the end it was kind of sad, and like, I don't know, I just didn't love it. I don't really love horses or art. So it was just kind of hard for me to get through. And I do feel like there's some lessons to be learned in it. It just wasn't for me. It just wasn't like one that I would be like, oh yes, recommend this. I feel like there's books that that cover these topics better. So that's what I have to say about Horse. It was fine. And I will say that most of the people in my book club enjoyed it. I think there was one other that was kind of like me that was like, oh, not for me, but most of them really really enjoyed it and thought it was well done. So I think this is just a me thing. And it's very popular. Like I couldn't even get it from my library like the whole month I requested. I had to do like a free Audible subscription to get an audio copy because I didn't want to buy its new hardcover. I didn't want to buy a new hardcover for a book I wasn't sure if I would like. So it's really popular. So maybe check it out if you're topics of racial equality and topics of horses and topics of art. You might love it. Wasn't particularly the horse part. Just wasn't for me. So you know, there we go. So that wraps up what I read for November. A lot of good stuff, a lot of books that made me think, a lot of books that made me cry, but just a lot of good stuff was read in November. So there it is. This is a longer video for me. Usually I try to do like some breaking up of book reviews in the month, but it didn't happen in November. So there you are. Do with that what you will. I hope you guys are doing well wherever you are. I hope you find some time today to read a good book or two. And if you are having a bad hair day, just wear a bandana.